at some of the common cognitive distortions, these thinking errors, which are so important to learn how to reframe. And we will certainly be spending a significant amount of time in the 6-week masterclass series on reviewing how to reframe. So the 8 cognitive distortions are all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, discounting the positive, emotional reasoning, mind reading, false should statements, faulty comparisons, and false expectations. So let's go over a few examples of these so that we can see how important it is to reframe them. In all or nothing thinking, people feel like they must be perfect at all times with everyone in their life, at work, of course, especially with the boss. And when you're constantly in this all or nothing mode, it makes things very stressful, which actually is counterproductive because it enhances making errors because of the constant feeling of stress. So the cognitive distortion of all or nothing thinking has a tendency to become the second cognitive distortion, which is catastrophizing. So you can see how these cognitive errors, when they're not corrected, can combine and accentuate each other. Catastrophizing basically always being in a state of stress and always feeling like the worst is going to happen. So these are readily correctable, and with the use of the wise advocate, you learn how to correct cognitive distortions and replace them with clear, true statements. Discounting the positive is a very common cognitive distortion in which people tend to forget or ignore the positive things that happen, and they tend to say things like, I make a mistake on a presentation, it's no good, I'm no good, and we over-identify with small errors and completely forget about the positives. A very important cognitive distortion to correct because it leads to emotional reasoning. And emotional reasoning is interpreting your feelings as facts, and not just facts about how you feel, which you relabel and then reframe to have them become constructive ways of seeing the world, but rather you understand them as facts in the real world and not recognize the distortion. So if you feel anxious and feel like something is wrong, you think something must be wrong. Now, we're certainly not saying that feeling something wrong is wrong does not lead to nothing being, interpreting that there being nothing wrong, but what feeling something wrong should lead to is consulting your wise advocate. And when you consult your wise advocate, you ask the question, is there really something wrong? And is the way I'm feeling excessive for the amount that things are wrong? And then when you consult the wise advocate, you start to correct not only the cognitive distortion, but also the external circumstance, and do it in a constructive way that leads to refocusing on adaptive behaviors. And then we have the last 4, which are really personal cognitive distortions. Mind readings, false should statements, faulty comparisons, false expectations. In mind reading, we tend to look out at people's responses and over-personalize and take personally other people's responses. So you see a friend tense up and you say, that must mean they're mad at me. Of course, a lot of this is just completely a cognitive distortion, but it's a common deceptive brain message to take personally reactions that you see in other people, especially if they're important people to you. But again, wise advocate tells you, calm down, assess the situation, don't take things too personally. Similarly with should statements, one of the things we're going to spend significant amount of time on in the 6-week masterclass is recognizing positive, productive should statements from faulty, false, distorted should statements. And that is a very important aspect of why consulting your wise advocate is so helpful, because you make a statement like, I should be able to do this and help my friend tonight. That just simply might not be true. Your wise advocate would very quickly tell you, you cannot finish all this work and help your friend tonight. You're going to need to let your friend know it's got to be tomorrow night. You're going to essentially be rational about the commitments that you make and the kinds of expectations that you create in others about what you can do. This is a very important aspect of how the wise advocate is helpful to us because it makes our should statements productive. It makes our should statements forward-looking and achievable, but too often we're having deceptive brain messages that are making false should statements, which then create unfulfillable expectations in others and leads to chronic stress. Very similar is faulty comparisons, where you look at other people and you say, they seem to be doing fine, what's wrong with me? Clearly, if you knew the things that other people were worrying about and consulted your wise advocate and realized, you know what, other people must also be worried about similar things to the things that I'm worried about, then your comparisons do not have this negative, cognitively distorted, deceptive brain message content, and again shows how correctable those mistakes are. And of course, false expectations is an extremely common one. The false expectations that we place not only on ourselves, but also on others. And it's another example of how when we have false expectations of what other people are going to do, then if that false expectation doesn't get fulfilled and we take it personally, we are creating huge amounts of stress for ourselves. So wise advocate is going to correct those false expectations. They're going to say that your interpretation of things not turning out exactly the way you expected is a cognitive distortion. If you don't do that regularly, the deceptive brain message will begin to take over. And on the other hand, the positive side is if you correct it regularly, the deceptive brain message will become weaker. And that is a very key example of self-directed neuroplasticity. So the general principle here is as you correct these cognitive distortions, you improve your brain function and you replace automatic correct assessments with what previously were false statements that you were making to yourself repeatedly. So the 4 steps is a key part of how you do this. The 4 steps are relabel, reframe, refocus, revalue. Now, these are all basically ways that were developed to get people to bring mindfulness into their moment-by-moment living, to bring consulting the wise advocate into how you regularly address your problems and how you approach solving your problems and dealing with the deceptive brain messages which inevitably occur. So when you relabel, you call things what they really are. When you reframe, you cognitively correct the distortions in the deceptive brain messages, as we just reviewed. And the combination of labeling things so that you become aware of what the problems really are, and then reframing so that you clarify what the truth really is, leads us to refocus. And then, as we've been saying, in consulting with the wise advocate, you focus your attention on adaptive behavioral responses, and that leads to focusing attention on adaptive ways of thinking. So we now really spend a lot of time accentuating relabel, reframe, refocus. Revalue is still the 4th step, but we de-emphasize that, and the reason why we de-emphasize it is because it happens automatically. If you think and put into practice relabel, reframe, refocus, you will automatically start to change the way you value thoughts and urges and not take them at face value. You'll recognize deceptive brain messages as simply sensations. You won't take them literally. You'll be correcting the cognitive distortions. So we really now put an accentuation on relabel, become aware, reframe, clarify, correct the cognitive content, and then refocus, which is where we really bring our commitment to change into play, and it's the refocus step that changes the brain. And how the refocus step changes the brain and the whole subject of how focusing attention changes the brain will be regularly referred to in the 6 weeks, in the 6-week masterclass session, and will really be explained during the 6-week masterclass session.